Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Tips for Increasing Learner Writing. The last session of the conference, but it's going to be a good one. Thank you for being here today. I am the facilitator, and we'll be chatting a little bit in the beginning, and then I'm going to be turning it over so that you can hear from four colleagues who've been doing some interesting work with writing, and I'm excited that you're going to hear from them. So today's session, I'm going to do a little introduction, and then most of the time is going to be hearing from the panelists and you having an opportunity to ask questions of the panelists, and then we will wrap up. So briefly, we talked a lot about writing this morning if you were at Lisa Lena's keynote, but let's just take a minute or so. What challenges do you face? What are some of your biggest challenges when teaching writing, or even just including writing in your class? What are some challenges? Time, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have intermittent students, right? Technical issues, giving feedback, resistance. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Our students can have a great deal of anxiety about writing. Oh, Britt, that I don't have the skills to do it properly. Yeah. Our feelings about our ability to teach writing can really impact us. They need a lot of help, with feedback. Obsession with perfection. Yes. We're going to address that today a little bit. Good prompts. Yeah, Google Docs, of course, the tech. Nervous to share. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot about getting hung up on grammar, the amount of time takes to give feedback. Time is an issue. Anxiety, student anxiety. Of course, I always say we talk a lot about math anxiety. Maybe not so much about writing anxiety, but it's real. Julie, they want me to correct every little thing. Yeah, I really had to teach my students. They need to be reminded of what the real purpose of writing is. And it's hard because grammar is very concrete sometimes, being able to see corrections and do worksheets. Unreadable handwriting. Let's talk to my husband. Thank you very much about some challenges. I want to just talk briefly that this is the second time that we've done this panel, and some of the panelists today are from the most recent writing study circle, and I run a writing study circle. I did it with Stephanie Summers, and then this year I co-facilitated it with a teacher from the International Institute, and we had a grand time. And the way it works is it's 4 virtual meetings over 4 months. So far, we've had 24 participants from around the state at all levels of students. Our major focus is increasing writing frequency, quality, and incorporation of technologies. So those are the main areas we focus on in those 4 meetings. And the reason that Stephanie Summers and I created this was to provide an environment that was really supportive, where teachers could talk about writing, share ideas about writing, and strengthen overall writing instruction for students. And I'm sorry, I should have said Jamie Wright. For any of you who know Jamie Wright from International Institute, she was my co-facilitator this past study circle. The pyramid of writing priorities, and I made a mention of this in the chat box this morning, when the largest number happened of the pie chart happened to be in getting students to write something every day, and that is something that we talk about in the study circle. It's called the pyramid of writing priorities, and it's this idea that there's 3 main kinds of writing that we ask students to do. The first is provisional writing, the second is readable writing, and the third is polished writing. And the pyramid, the base of the pyramid, the biggest part is provisional writing. That's just brief writing. That might be finishing a sentence stem, doing a quick write, the kind of writing where we don't need to worry about things like language conventions. The focus is really on ideas and deepening comprehension. Moving up to readable writing, where there's a little more focus on organized thinking and maybe putting together some short answers, maybe doing moving more towards connected sentences, paragraphs. Polished writing is the final one, and polished writing can be anything that students go through a process, right? It doesn't have to be an essay. It might be a presentation. It might be that they're designing a flyer for something, for a garage sale, say they're designing. But it goes through a process of creating something and then working on revision and editing and then producing a final product. So, quickly, we want students to be writing low stakes writing every time we have them. Weekly, of course, this weekly or less or more often than polished writing, but not quite as much as provisional writing. And monthly, that can differ depending on how often you have your students. But the polished writing is something that we want to do less than that every day, every lesson writing. So before I turn over to the panelists, I like this quote. I found this quote recently. It is important to separate the creator and the editor or internal censor when you practice writing, so that the creator has space to breathe, explore, and express. And this is not easy for our students, especially students who've developed as writers where they believe they need to write perfectly all the time, or they're just so they're so focused, right, on they have this idea of what writing is, and writing is much more than just writing something polished. It's expressing ourselves, it's connecting to what we already know. It is um uh organizing our thinking. There's so many reasons for writing. And so I'm excited for you to hear today from four wonderful teachers. And oh, one more thing. So some of you know that my dissertation work is around writing, adult writing instruction. And I've been in my research, I found that when surveys have been done, of adult ed teachers, these tend to be what adult ed teachers express are some of the big challenges. And maybe some of these will resonate with you. We don't test writing on level gain tests, right? We have reading. We have our NRS reading tests and our math tests, and sometimes we do the language test or we do listening. We don't do writing, right? And so if we have limited time, we have to always keep our eye on the fact that we do need to show level gains. A lot of times doing exercises, particularly worksheets, such as grammar worksheets, they're often seen as more valuable and concrete by students. Some teachers express they feel a lack of confidence. They're not sure what effective writing instruction involves. Or they'll say, I know how to teach writing at one level, but if now I'm working with GED students and I don't know how to teach academic writing or argument analysis. A lot of times, academic writing can be seen as needed by students going on to college only. And academic writing is really, it's not just for college, it's for work, it's for community involvement. It's for a lot of things. For English learners or multilingual learners, students, they love to spend time on reading, listening, and speaking, and writing might be more difficult because there may be anxiety around that. Teachers across the country say quality professional development isn't always available or accessible around writing. We've really started to make that more of a priority here in Minnesota. And writing is complex to teach, and it's complex to learn. And even, those of us who our students look to as certainly our teachers find writing easy. That I'm sure is not true at all, particularly depending on the kind of writing we're being asked to do. We all are growing as writers. We all have writing strengths, and we have things that we need to work on. So With that, I am turning over to the panelists. So each panelist is going to share, and then hopefully we'll have a few minutes to ask some questions. If we run out of time, we'll hold those questions until the end. So let's start off. Denise, I am turning it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Denise Goldman, and I work at Project for Pride in Living in the Diploma Connect program. That program is focused on the adult high school diploma. So we work with usually levels 3 to 5, but have also worked with level 2. I think that level 1 is probably a little too low for what we do, but it's a range. Next slide. So what I wanted to talk today about is using mentor text and sentence starters. Using mentor text was a little bit new for me until this most recent writing circle that Kristine was talking about. And using I always thought of mentor text as they have to be masterful works. They have to be incredibly good. Something, really high level, but I'm kind of realizing that they don't. That a mentor text, in my mind at least, could be about really anything. So, or, it could be written by anyone. It could be written by us. It's something that is good enough that a student will be learning from it, in my mind. I always think about learning to write similar to learning to paint. I'm not a painter, but I know that a lot of times with people learning fine art techniques, they look to the masters to do that, and then they break down the process. So I think a lot of us talked about in the chat when Kristine first started that there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear around writing. And so I think that looking at things, breaking them down as we all do when we're teaching, and especially with sentence starters, that it can ease the fear of that blank page that so many of our students have. So in the next slide, you'll see one of the ways that I am doing this is through, in the adult diploma program, you have to write an essay. And one of the choices is an argumentative essay. And so one of the ways that I have students get started with their thesis for the argumentative essay is to give them a model, to give them some kind of mentor text. So this one was actually written by AI. And you'll see with the 3 highlighted words, although users should. So I give this to them, and don't go to the next page, Kristine, but on the next page, you'll see me just kind of break it out into sentence starters, fill in the blank type thing. So this one I put into AI, give me 10 sentences, 10 thesis statements that use although, users should, and it gave me all of these. And I put them into something here at you can go ahead and click on that, Kristine. I put this into Flippity, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, another thing that I learned in the writing circle. So I put it into Flippity, and Kristine, you are welcome to just kind of flip and see how it works. So basically you can take pieces of it, and I like to just show students that although, so at the top there, that top column says, or top row, sorry, says although who should. So although access to information on the internet is vast, educators should focus on a more holistic approach, or educators should be taught critical thinking skills. And so some of these aren't going to make sense, and some of them will. And they're kind of fun to just play with. So I've got different people in the middle column, different although statements at the beginning, and then different statements at the end. And so it's just a way for them to play with it, right? Make it a little bit more accessible. And what I will have them do is keep spinning until they have something that makes sense. So they'll write down maybe 3 of these full sentences. Although social media is a popular means of communication, high school students should be encouraged to have face-to-face interactions to improve collaboration. So I have them write these down so that they get the sense of it's not hard, right? It's just intimidating for them. It's not hard. So although who should? We can go back to the slideshow and the next slide. So this is what I'll give them and have them simply fill in the blanks, right? And they can do that from Flippity, and then we move forward into them doing it themselves. So they've got their argument that they're making, and we need to be addressing the other end of the argument. So it can be about anything, obviously. And so I let them do a bunch of these and just come up with anything that they can, and then move into what their actual topic is. So that's my main example. On the next slide, I have some tips. I think that's something that we do with mentor texts that we, or fail to do, I should say, or at least I fail to do, is explain why the mentor text is successful. And so I think that pulling out those keywords really helps students to understand why it works. You can't just put something in front of them and say, this is good versus this is bad. There's no explanation there. It's like when the students are telling us, I don't get it. And you're like, well, what is it that you don't get? And if we don't teach them to recognize what are those keywords or why is that working, I think that that's something that we often miss. Encourage silliness. So, you know, just make things up, let them play around, let them mix things up, and just kind of have fun with it. Give a lot of no stakes opportunity to experiment. So with that Flippity chart, and then with the fill in the blanks, they can do as many as you want, and it takes away some of that pressure, because it's like, you're going to do 10 of them. You're never going to, it doesn't matter if they're not going to use them. We're not going to critique them. We're not going to even share them. We're just going to do them. And so I think sometimes we just need to practice knowing that these can go away. Have students craft multiple answers. So again, I will have them do 5 of those fill in the blanks about their own topic, so that we can really try and see what's working, what's not working. Break the template if needed. If those words are not working for them, give them more, give them different ones that they can do. And then do for me, but using AI to generate examples. It's incredible to me that you can just like put in, you know, 5 things, 5 words, and AI generates 10 thesis statements for me. And what I use them, I don't know, but they're good to use with the students as an example. And then on the next slide is just why I think writing is important. I think that it processes our thinking. If we can take the fear away from it, then I think that we can just get the words out differently. So there's a lot, and with my students, we do a lot of talking about just write something down. It doesn't matter. And sometimes I'll have them just talk to me, and I'll write it down, and we'll read it back. And it's, you know, I'll type while they talk. And it's like, do you see that this is the exact same thing? And it helps them think it through. Relates to all subjects, obviously, builds confidence, allows for self-expression. I think that a lot of students just don't see any purpose to it, and they don't understand that it can really be another form of self-expression. That is it for me. That's my section of this.
Well, Denise, I know there are
Yeah.
a couple questions that I'm answering
Okay.
about Flippity,
Yeah.
but we had a question about just a little more explanation of what a mentor text is. Some people haven't heard of what it is.
Okay. I mean, Kristine, you can add to this, or anybody can add to this as much as you want, because I was new to the concept of a mentor text, or at least that wording. The way that I think of a mentor text is literally anything that can be shown as an example, something that is done the way that you're trying to teach it to be done. So in my mind, a mentor text can be anything. If I'm teaching, if I'm teaching a paragraph structure, and I want to pull from an essay that was written in a magazine or anything, I can take something that, for me, it's any text that shows what I'm trying to do and shows a good example of that. do people have things to add to that? Because I don't know that I have a specific.
Yeah, I'd like to turn it over to the other panelists as well, if you have anything to add about a mentor text, what you've learned or how you might have used them.
Can share. One thing that I use for mentor text too is a way to study kind of the moves and the author's craft. So for example, if we're working on different ways to start a writing piece, maybe we'll look at a few different authors' work and look at how they start their memoir or their narrative. Like they start off maybe describing the setting of where they were, or they start off with describing what's kind of happening around them, with if there's like a noise, and describing a situation that's occurring. So really it's a way to like study the moves that the author has used in their writing, and then trying it out and then having our students try it out in their writing.
That's great, Kori.
Yeah, I would add to that
Go ahead.
too.
Oh, please, Tony, go ahead.
So one of the things that I would also encourage, it takes a bit to get up and running, but once we start writing and doing peer reviews and revising and kind of coming up with final pieces of writing, I will then use student examples as mentor texts moving forward so that they can see themselves in the work that they're doing as well.
Perfect. And I think that connects to what Denise had said about it doesn't have to be a masterful work. And so student texts can certainly serve as mentor text. I think the key, they're also called anchor texts. The key is, and I'm putting it in the chat, it can be a single sentence that has maybe a grammatical structure that you would like students to work with or to replicate. And the key is that we have to lead students into understanding, as Denise had said, what it is about that mentor text, the craft in it, whatever we're focusing on, and we want to be very explicit about that, and then give students opportunities. It can be something like writing a poem, where you give a student a short poem and you work through the poem, and then you say, I want you to write a poem that uses the same structure and the same length of lines, but about your own topic. So it is really a model, but you spend time with that model and studying it. So like a haiku. Haikus are wonderful. Absolutely. Read some haikus. Talk about the haikus. Talk about how many syllables, the fact that they're 3 lines. And then, ask students to use that knowledge and that structure and create their own haiku. Any other questions for Denise?
Kristine, I was just going to say that reminds me of poems that I've taken before with students, and you have them rewrite them, right? But you rewrite them missing certain words or from their own standpoint, from their own perspective, that type of thing, which is a lot like the artist piece, I think.
Great, thank you. I also see Joanne is asking, can one choose the level of writing?
For flippity?
For flippity, yeah.
Yeah, so flippity is it from my use of it, it doesn't do anything for you. So there's no choosing levels. You create the levels. So the things that you saw me do with the scrolling, I put all those words in. So you can do any level that you want. And they also have multiple different games and things on there that you can play around with.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And thank you. I want to draw your attention to the chat box as you're colleagues are also putting some great ideas in the chat box. Thank you so much, Denise.
Thank
Turning
you.
it over to Tony.
Thanks again. So my name is Tony Newis. It says Anthony because that's my real name, and my email is Anthony Newis. So if you're searching for me, there you go. But I work for Minneapolis Adult Education, and for many years I've been a reading instructor. But in the last couple of years, I've now become a beginner and advanced writing instructor. So that's been really nice to be on the other side as a reading instructor and then now seeing it this way. Next slide, please. So before, right before this started, we were talking briefly about how some of the greatest education is when we have these opportunities to just share with each other and hearing from each other. And a lot of times what I find is that ideas that I have already been kind of toying with or messing around with, I see it actually, I see somebody doing it and they're explaining the good reason behind it. And it essentially validates what I've been doing, and it allows me to have language to communicate more clearly about why I'm doing it. And so that certainly was true of today and of the writing circle. So in the writing circle that some of us attended, one of the things that we talked about is the concept of quick writes. And if you were at the training earlier today, our keynote speaker talked a little bit about this concept, looking at making inferences. But the idea here is that we want to create space for learners to just have an opportunity to write, develop ideas, and just putting a lot into quantity, not quality, right? So the idea there is we've already been talking about it, but helping students to develop ideas without worrying about the spelling, the grammar, the perfection. I saw Mara say in the chat earlier. So as we give them space, we know that this kind of creates confidence, which leads to success. So let's take a look at an example on the next slide. Here's two examples. On the left-hand side, what I will do if we are working on descriptive writing, I do this once a week. I do various quick writes each day, so they have that provisional writing practice. But one example is working on descriptive writing. And so what I'll do is I'll put this picture up on the board, and the first thing that we'll do is we'll have a conversation. And so this will be in the next slide, the tip, but I'm just going to talk through it real quick now. The idea is you've got a variety of different students and different levels in your class. You've got people they've been in the class and now new people are starting. And so we just decided as a group to have a quick conversation first. So I might just call on someone and say, okay, give me a subject. And someone might say, the jacket, right? The jacket is red. And so I'll write that on the board and then just calling on different people. The sky is gray. Or maybe an advanced student might say, the man is shoveling because he wants the sidewalk safe. And so just writing down all these ideas on the board first. And then what I'll do is give them 7 minutes of just silent writing, where now they're just going to try and write as much as they can. I'll walk around, and I'm not really trying to correct anything. I might just give some tips a little bit as I go. But the idea is just giving them space to just develop their ideas. On the right-hand side, we also have an example of making inferences. And so I am a big fan of introducing all of these concepts at the lower the level, the better, right? These are all things that people are capable of doing at any level, whether it is starting with a verbal conversation or full on writing their ideas. So here's a couple of those examples. And why don't you go to the next screen real quick, Kristine, please, and thank you. So we talked about that first one, just giving them time to talk about it. And I like to write down their ideas so that they can reference them. Number two, I'm saying that these routines really require consistency, right? So as I mentioned, I do a different writing warm-up every day to so they know exactly what to expect, right? The other thing about that too then is that as new students show up in your classes, the older students have that opportunity to become the instructor and they can support those students. And so it really makes the community that much more collaborative and supportive. Number three, to me, this probably should be number one, but really focusing on creating a strong environment in your classroom. Just a really nice place where people can feel free to make mistakes. Something that I wrote there is if we are expecting these learners to be vulnerable, then we really need to honor that and kind of raise up this concept of mistakes, right? And using that as that learning opportunity. Now, I know we always talk about mistakes are good, but it is a challenge to really create that environment. And so it requires just regularly checking in, like your perfection, leave it at the door, right? And so when mistakes happen, we kind of applaud them, right? The last thing is if you're using pictures, make sure that students can identify themselves in them. This could be just universal situations that people experience. Food, family, right? Perhaps you know the different countries where some of your students are from, and so maybe you're bringing in different cities they might recognize to describe. So next slide, please. I'm just looking at Kate's question. She says, when you write the examples on the board, do you find that students are just tempted to copy when they go off and write on their own? I would say yes, and I'm perfectly happy if they're copying those ideas. And then as long as they're then going to the next step, right? And oftentimes what happens is they mimic a sentence that they saw on the board and they change the subject or they change an adjective. And so I think that's perfectly fine. Why more writing? We've been talking about this, just this idea that perfection really stops us. And so creating that environment that stresses making these mistakes allows us to create something good. So this is something that has to happen regularly, right? It has to, the more we do it, the more this development happens. I will say I'm seeing the benefits happen very quickly. I often create classes together with the learners. And so one of the things that we do at the, after our silent writing is done is I will then have them think about just a couple things to think about. Are they using capital letters at the beginning of every sentence? Are there periods at the end, you know, if this is a lower level class? So I'll have them take a moment to think about their own work, and then I'll have them join a group of 2 or 3 people, and then they share their work together and give some suggestions. And so we kind of build in peer review into our class every day so that we have this ability to support each other. And then the last thing that I do is call on some people to share, and it's always a pretty fun thing. It started with people just sitting at their tables sharing, and then it moved on to one day a student stood up at their table and shared. And then a week later, a student just walked to the front of the class, turned around and looked at all of us and began to share their work. And everybody applauded, and that's what we do now. And so I think what we've been talking about now, potentially bringing in at the end of the week, presenting to other classes. So that's what we've been doing, and I'm hoping that you are able to see yourself a little bit in this. I'm certain many of you are doing similar things. So, questions, comments?
Yes, if you have any questions for Tony, please ask.
I was just going to add a quick thing to what Tony's saying. Like, I think that it's really important to notice how simple some of these things are, right? Like, just to take the fear away, but also to just make it a routine. It has to be simple and it has to be clear. And I really like that about what you're doing.
That's a great point. There is a question here, Tony. Do you allow students to write in their first language in the quick writes?
I've got a student. I'm not against it. I think really learning happens in so many different ways, and who am I to get into the way of what makes sense for somebody else? Do you have a student that he will put it in his own language? Yeah, he does put it in his own language, and then he translates it. I don't have the language or the evidence to support why I'm okay with this. I guess going back to community, I think that's important. Now, is this person like turning in these perfect grammatical sentences? Nope. I can see that they're still going through this process of thinking it through and working through the ideas that we're working on. And so I don't know. I guess Kristine, I know that you've talked a little bit about this too, that maybe you have students that do something similar. Maybe you've got suggestions.
Yeah, they're actually, just so you know, Tony, there is a lot of research that backs having students use or mix their L1 and L2 languages, especially when it's provisional and it's about ideas and expression and quick writes. Where I had students who would switch back and forth, so that they could keep writing. And I always talk about my one student, she would switch back and forth between English and French. The goal is English, but it is an incredible asset to have another language or other languages. There's a great book, and Patsy gave it to me actually, and I will put it here in the chat box. It's called Writing Between Languages, and how English learners make the transition to fluency, with some examples, and you can see kind of the development and the blending. And this Vicky says here, it is a developmental stage to translate off of first language. Yeah. One more question there, Tony. A couple questions. Okay, wait. If you are teaching low level, could they orally say the name of the objects in the picture and then write down the letters they hear? Could that start a quick write routine?
Seems like it to me. Yeah. I'm just one of those people where if things, if we're, I just saw the word organic. If there's some routines that are organically happening and the students are leading the way and it's creating an environment where people are able to develop and grow, and yep, I'm all for it. And was there another question? And maybe you can speak to that more. How
There was
much?
one more question about how much do your students want to use their phones to find translations?
Um, I see phones in my class as a tool all of the time. I don't entirely always know why it's being used. I've got a pretty good eye of seeing when a student's looking at their phone to, because they're not engaged, and if I see that, then I'll connect with them. But typically, when I see phones, it seems to be, like I say, in a way of as a tool. Uh, and there are plenty of activities in the class where they're working in small groups or they aren't using their phones. So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of it's a tough one to know when do we rely on it and when do we release. Again, it sounds like there's a fair amount of evidence that suggests using your own language, in which case it might be good to have a phone to help translate, but these are questions I don't always have the answers to.
Well, thanks, Tony. Yeah, this is something that I talk a lot about with my graduate students. It's the idea of translanguaging and the idea of English only policies have really never worked. They've never been productive. That being said, the goal is to learn English, but there are times when, again, it's low stakes. We want students to have an opportunity to really flesh out their ideas, whether they're speaking or they're writing, and we want them, if they can do that in their home language, then that's a wonderful tool for them to use.
Just lastly, I would really quickly say that thing about balance is important, right?
Mhm.
If the student is relying on your phone and you see this, then they're not going to grow, right? And I work with adults. It's easy to have a conversation about that kind of thing. And so, choose your own adventure, I guess. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Tony. Next, we have Dr. Kori McKibben from South Suburban. She teaches literally like 2 miles from my house.
Yeah. Um, so as Kristine has said, I teach for South Suburban adult ed, and I teach GED classes to all levels. So the one room schoolhouse, I often hear it called. And today I'm going to be talking to you about a really easy strategy that I love for the use in both reading and writing, called boxes and bullets. So what I love about it is that it doesn't really require any extra preparation, and students can really learn how to draw out the boxes and bullets to use in a variety of situations. So if they're taking the GED test and I'm not there, they can still draw out their boxes and bullets to create the main idea and supporting details of a paragraph or a passage, or to organize their thinking for writing. So as you can see, there's a box at the top, and in that box, we write the main idea. So this could be if you're reading a paragraph and you determine the main idea of the paragraph, or if you're reading a whole passage and you're determining the main idea. You can put the main idea in the box, and then the bullets are the supporting details. So again, you can use it in writing, and then you can translate it over into, into reading, and then you can translate it over into writing. So I'll have my students come up with, like, what is their main idea or what is their thesis, right? And then what are the reasons that follow, right? So you can do it too in terms of kind of determining where your students are at, of are we working on kind of just composing a paragraph, and what is the main idea or what is their thesis for the paragraph, and then the supporting details. You can also then, if your students are ready and at that place that you're doing more of essay work, you can still use it also to start organizing the overall thesis of the essay, and then have the students with the bullet points list their reasoning and evidence. And then they're able to take a bullet point from those reasons to create then each of those body paragraphs. So if we look at an example, I had my students, we were doing a unit on like why books get banned or challenged. And we did a reading on why books get challenged or banned. And so the first work that we did was identifying the main idea of the passage that we read, and then some of the supporting details. So in this case, they discovered that there's many reasons why books are challenged or banned. And then some of the examples that they found, supporting details, were from like parent and guardian complaints. Maybe there was sexual content in the text. There's maybe violence in the text. There's drug use. And so those are maybe some of the reasons why. Then I took it a step further after we did a lot of different learning about why books get banned and challenged and kind of the current culture and climate around it. And we did where the students created kind of like their opinion, right? So argumentative writing. We said, okay, like you need to kind of decide, what do you think? And so in their box, they put their thesis or their main idea, right? So some students could put like books should not be banned, like from public libraries, or some students said like books should be banned from school libraries. So they put their thesis in the box, and then their bullet points were their supporting details for their thesis. So for example, students might say like, you can choose what books you read, right? No one like is making you. You can choose, you can monitor your child's choice, representation in books matter, learning about perspectives and different views is important for the world we live in. And so the students then, as I kind of take it to the next step, we do then practice how we write out then a paragraph using our boxes and bullets. And then again, this could be a paragraph, right? And I could stop there. Or now I have kind of my outline for my introductory paragraph, and perhaps we're going to extend it further. And each of those bullet points are now going to become a body paragraph. So maybe in my next boxes and bullets, the thesis or the topic sentence is going to say, you can choose what books you read. And then they list out the bullets of what are some of the reasons and supporting details of that topic sentence. So you can really use it as like a tool to determine main idea and supporting details from a text. But you can also use it to create like a paragraph, or if, like I said, if your students are kind of at that place and they're ready, you can extend it even further and use it as a way to help structure a longer essay. Next slide, thank you. So some tips when implementing, right, boxes and bullets is to model, as we know, right? Doing it together, like even in like a shared writing experience or an interactive writing experience can be really powerful, but we know modeling is so important. So make sure you're modeling a lot and having lots of guided practice. So sometimes, like I said, I might give an idea of like 2 different options for like a thesis. That way I can help support and scaffold more for my students that need it. And then it's so important too to demonstrate transfer. So if you have a student that is working on they're studying for their GED test and they are working on their extended response, you could say, hey, do you remember this would be a great place for you to use your boxes and bullets to organize your thinking. And so that they can see how they can transfer it and use it in many different situations and in different settings. So modeling, drawing out those boxes and bullets and using it when the opportunity presents itself, right? So again, right, if you have a student that's studying even for the social studies test or, you know, their language arts test, and they have to determine the main idea or supporting details, you can say, hey, this is a great place where you can draw out your boxes and bullets, and that way you have it nice and organized for your thinking for these questions. Okay, next slide. And why more writing? Obviously it's such a crucial life skill. And I would say it's by far the area that's the least confident in like 100% of my students. And so whether my students are going for the GED test, their goals to be take post-secondary classes. Some of them maybe already are enrolled, but they need to like brush up on skills. They want career advancement, job advancement. Writing is a crucial component that they need to feel more comfortable with and successful with. And it's really like a tool for communication. When we think about even post-secondary, a lot of post-secondary institutions have some type of an online component where students are expected to write discussion posts or email back and forth. Same within their jobs, right? There's a huge emphasis on communication in writing. And also because writing is just hard, right? It's hard and there needs to be explicit instruction. And we use it literally every single day in our lives, whether it's in text messages or emails. We use written communication constantly. So that's why it's important to help support our students in feeling successful in their abilities to write. So any questions? I didn't see in the chat.
Well, your boxes and bullets is a hit. And so we have a few minutes here. Any questions for Kori?
I would just kind of ask, and this has come up with me, and I think you've kind of touched upon this, but the problem that I have sometimes with my intermediate level, you know, once the students get writing, it's good and they have a lot of prior knowledge and we kind of facilitate that. But what do you do? I mean, you kind of mentioned scaffolding ways, but what do you do just initially to get them started? That seems to be kind of the difficulty. They're just, you know, where to begin.
Sure. You know, usually it kind of depends on the task too. I know, for example, you know, on the GED test, whether it's in the ELA portion or the extended response, and just in post-secondary courses, I feel like there's a really, really heavy emphasis on argumentative writing. And so, I do sometimes kind of then will like start there because it is sometimes easier for students to write their opinion about something or their thoughts about something as like a starting point. So like I said, we did some work with like reading about why books get banned or challenged, and read articles and current events and looked at graphs and all of that. And then kind of, so we built some and had a place to go for evidence. So for students who maybe are getting a bit more proficient in their writing, I also then would start really pushing them to really think about the evidence and how they're presenting the evidence in their writing.
Thanks.
Great. If you have any other questions, hold on to them because I want to make sure that you get to hear from Linda, who is our final panelist. Thank you so much, Kori. So far, Denise, Tony, Kori, it's been just great to hear from you. So I'm going to ask Linda to come on down. You're the next contestant.
Thank you. Hello. I am Linda Westlund, and I teach for Lakeville ABE. I focus on ESL all levels. I have a volunteer each day that helps with a breakout for my beginner students, but we pretty much have all levels, all the way up to advanced. So I guess the topic today is going to be email dialogues, and this came from a reading actually from the writing study circle. And in that reading, they recommended doing written journal dialogues that you can pass back and forth with your students. And that particular week, we were asked to try to implement some technology. And so I was kind of thinking about ways that I could combine email skills and working on technology with that journal idea. So computers are not something that we do very often in my class. It's an in-person class. It tends to be a very large process to get students logged in to their district email, and then the two-step verification and students in and out. So computers, it's definitely something that I have to work up to, and getting all the login information. And then usually things like typing are quite new for a lot of my students. So just giving you some background and some confidence that if you never do computers in your class, that's okay. And I tried to kind of scaffold this so that day one was much easier, and then getting to day 4 was a little bit harder. So I had a lot of students asking me for some keyboarding skills and email skills. So that's kind of what got me started as well. So for this particular assignment, I had them write me an email each day during class about a specific topic. So this shows you day 1 was, what are your winter plans? Day 2 was, what are your weekend plans, your hobbies? And then the final day was a little bit more advanced by attaching a photo as well as inserting a link. So each day we kind of got a little bit more advanced in the skill we learned in class, and then they applied that skill in their email. And I do see these students every day, Monday through Thursday, if they are able to attend every day. So that made it really nice for the progression. Next slide, please. So I also provided a frame to get some of my students started. And then I also kind of said that this was optional, especially for my advanced students who maybe wanted to take it in a different direction, as long as the topic was consistent. So I even wrote out the to and the subject, because we had talked about subject and what would be a good subject line, and capitalizing things in a subject. And then we talked about the structure of your greeting and signing your name at the end. And we talked about the comma that comes after the greeting. And so those were just little skills we were trying each day. My focus was more on email structure and formatting more than it was on, grammar, punctuation, although we got into a little bit of punctuation as the days went on. So I would ask them to put in their own idea, change the blue words, put in your own idea. This was actually the last day. So this skill was quite advanced because I would model how to insert or how to attach a picture to their email, and then how to insert a link. For some students, it was great for their level and they were on it. For other students, I was happy if they just got the picture done or an adjective. And so I'll show you a few student examples actually on the next slide. So this was one of my students who is a little bit more beginner, especially when it came to technology skills. And so in this one, she wrote about the beach. She did attach a picture of the beach. I didn't put it here just because I wanted to make sure that the copyright rules were okay. But so she told me how the picture made her feel, and obviously has some errors here when it came to writing about the picture. Missed the part about linking the website, but got the sincerely with a capitalization error here, but she had sincerely with the comma and then signed her name, which was great. She was missing the greeting. And so I would respond to students because they would actually email it to me. And then I would, in my response, try to model, like I'd be sure to reply to this person with a greeting to kind of, show how an email should look. And then I think I'll talk about punctuation a little bit later, but you can see here the no space before or after. We did a lesson based on this, just about, when we're typing, how is it different? And, how many spaces and all those things. And then I think the next example is one of my advanced students with the same assignment. So you can see hers is much more complete. She has a lot more information. She has the greeting, and she was telling me just why she visited that website and why she liked it, and just her plans. She was an artist, and she said she gets inspiration from this website. She wanted to paint a poinsettia during Christmas time. And then she told me she likes to surf Michael's. They have the art supplies. And if they asked me a question, I always tried to answer that question directly. Or respond something like, "Oh yeah, Michael's is a great store. It has some great deals sometimes," or "I hope you had success buying some cheap things during the sale." And then I didn't prompt her to write this, but she even has that I've attached this image, which was a great just clarification. And then, yeah, so that's that example. And then we can move on. So I definitely have learned the hard way. Sometimes, I have an idea like, let's do this with technology. It'll be great. It'll be super simple. And then just from previous experience, I've realized like, oh, typing, like knowing how to hit enter was very new for some of my students, because a lot have used their cell phones for typing out emails. So actually working with a desktop computer or laptops is what we were doing in class was quite new for them. I did have a few students who had a previous experience as accountants or other careers in their home countries, but I would say for 95% of my students, they just needed to start with typing. So we just did a week, about an hour a day of typing.com to learn home row, very basic typing skills, free websites that they could do at home. And then each email should have a specific skill that they're working on. And for example, my first few emails were just on greeting, closing, and the commas that we put. And then the last ones, we were trying to focus more on the computer skills of how to insert links, how to attach photos. And then I used the first few emails to guide the instruction. So, I knew the next day we needed to talk about spaces after punctuation, not before punctuation. And then their motivation it was definitely increased just knowing that I was going to read their email and I was going to respond to their email. And so that was one thing I took away from the writing circle, was just giving our students real tasks, whether it's writing to someone in the city or something. And they seem to take assignments a little bit more seriously when we kind of give them that purpose. And I think my last day of doing the inserting image and link was too much. I ended up, I think, taking a second day to wrap that up because I thought, oh, that was a bad idea. So less is definitely more. Next slide, please. So this assignment, I chose this one because I realized no matter what field my students end up in, they need to know how to write, and emails, are really important for simple things, even if they never plan to enter the workforce. There's contacting customer service reps through Amazon or whatever, or job applications, contacting teachers at schools, because a lot of teachers email things home for students at school. And so the parents, they're interested in responding and knowing how to respond. And then they're always very motivated to work on technology. I try to do 2 big projects a year. I wish I could do more, but we do all areas of instruction in class. And so that's kind of been my goal. So I'm hoping in the spring to do some sort of follow-up. And then most of my writing assignments are on paper, but the phone technology is really great. But there are times when our students will have to use laptops or desktop computers. And so I was trying to kind of give them some more exposure to that. So that's it. Happy to ask or answer any questions.
Yes, if you have any questions, go ahead. We're at the end of the day. You can unmute if you'd like to ask the question, or you can post a question in the chat box to Linda or any of our other panelists.
Hello. I just wanted to say I empathize with the difficulty in booking computer time for the students. And I love the simplicity of what you're suggesting. I hadn't thought of it, and I definitely will start with that for some of my classes. So thank you.
And any ideas that anyone else has to, change this or adapt this would be awesome in the chat. If you taught an online class or like a hybrid, I could see you using this pretty regularly, for just, I don't know, regular check-ins, or you could stay on the same email thread throughout the year. And then you could actually see how a student progresses from their beginning email to later on in the year. That could be kind of cool to try.
I have an in-person class, and I was wondering whether to use voice recordings just to get them more involved in speaking English occasionally.
We have a couple questions. Janine is chatting out. Online teachers, any ideas for how to get online students to not only do the writing, but to submit it? I remember when I was teaching, and I was teaching GED prep, and I would have them take a picture and text me or email. But if you have any suggestions for that, or any ideas for teaching digital literacy skills without the student having access to the actual technology, that's a really real question.
You could possibly have them use their cell phones, because most students, all my students have phones, and I think most students do nowadays, but they could get on the Wi-Fi and you could try to navigate. It's a little harder on phones, but you could still try to navigate that a little bit on email.
I can speak to the online getting students to write. I do the exact same thing in person as I do online with these warm-ups or quick writes. And one of the things that I don't know what your platform capabilities are, what we use something called Schoology. And so I use the polling function all the time. So I will say, right before we do the exercise, I'll say, okay, do we understand? Do we have any questions? And because it's a routine, typically there aren't. And then I'll just ask, okay, are we ready to write? And then I'll wait. Everybody says yes. And so I hadn't thought about it till now, but in that sense, it's almost like this sort of agreement that we're making, right? And the other thing is I because I am not stressing perfection, I don't I don't pick apart all of their work, but I do give little pieces of advice along the way. And so I think I saw people in the chat earlier saying if you want some suggestions on your writing, then there's only one way to get that, and that's by sharing your work, right? So I think kind of having that expectation built in and having that kind of nugget to offer them can be really helpful.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a great quote, and I've used it many, many times. If you have time to correct everything your students are writing, then they're not writing enough. And I think there are definitely times where we do need to give feedback on language conventions, and then there are times when the ideas are more important. I would often tell my students when they would write something, my multilingual learners, they would write something and they would give it to me, and I'd say, this is really, you know, this is really great. And they would ask me, this is so all my grammar is okay. I said, no, 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 no. You've made mistakes. I said, but I'm a native speaker of English and I can completely read what you've written here and it makes total sense to me. And I think that sometimes we forget what a huge accomplishment that is to be able to speak or to write in another language, and it is far from perfect, but native speakers can understand and follow. That that's enormous. I honestly don't know that I've ever gotten to that point in either of the languages that I've studied. So I would often tell my students that. Any final questions? We just have a couple minutes left. Or comments?
I was going to add to one of Linda's comments that she wrote in a response in the chat, the idea of writing an email in their notebook. An email is a letter, right? And we forget that all these things existed before computers. So we can do all of these things without, like even that, the spinny thing that I was showing in Flippity. The concept of that comes from when I used to put out cut up pieces of paper and have students put things in order, right? So I think that we could make things more accessible if we just think of what would we have done, what did we do as kids, before all of this, and maybe there's kids on here who had computers as kids, but I didn't. So, but yeah, so just, thinking backwards.
Kristine,
Oh,
you're
you're
muted.
muted, Kristine.
I always say me being muted is often a lot of people in my life's favorite mode for me to be on. I just want to thank you all. Thank you for your own ideas you've put in the chat. Please save the chat if you're inclined to do so. Some great things. To the panelists, thank you so much. I think the biggest thing here is get them writing, and it doesn't have to be huge and complicated, right? And we want them to feel confident just as much as we want them to do the writing. It's kind of like math. If they feel anxiety and they don't feel confident, it's going to be hard to even get started, right? So we want them to have some positive experiences and to recognize they have a lot to share and a lot to say. So thank you so much. And with